Today on Blue 58, there's a lot going on in Green Bay as minicamp comes to a close. As we head into the dead period of the NFL calendar, let's talk through a few of the issues and questions facing the Packers.
Blue 58!
Hello and welcome to another episode of Blue 58, the one and only podcast of thepowersweep.com. I'm your host, John Meerdink, and I am happy to be with you here for another episode. Got a lot that we want to get to today on a bunch of different subjects. But first, a correction in our last episode, and I think possibly at least one other time before then. I made a mistake as to Luke Musgrave's injury from last season. He did not have a ruptured spleen. He had a lacerated kidney. My mistake for getting the wrong internal body part there that he had some issues with last season, and thank you to Carl Anderson for calling that to my attention as well. So we will make sure to get that right going forward. Lacerated kidney for Luke Musgrave, not a ruptured spleen. I was thinking back to Chris Sims back when he was with the Buccaneers, who had the ruptured spleen. But who knows? These things happen from time to time. Internal body parts, not even safe from the game of football. Okay, minicamp coming to a close here. And as we've kind of watched things play out, it's clear that this roster is both basically set, still a little bit in flux, and in a good but unusual spot as far as position battles go. The first point there is, I think, something that's been clear to anybody who listens to this show for a while now. When you're building an NFL roster, the roster building is basically done as soon as the NFL draft is over and you get your undrafted free agents in. There's not going to be a lot that changes with the Packers or really any NFL team between now and really the start of the regular season. The team that we've got now in Green Bay is the team that we're going to be watching on the field throughout this fall. That is, if you pay attention to how teams are built, that is pretty obvious. That's how this works. The other thing is that things are still in flux a little bit because of how things go with a young roster. Who is going to take what spot? Who is going to be the long-term answer at a position is kind of up in the air. And that leads us to the third point there, that the Packers are in a good spot as far as position battles go, but in kind of an unusual one as well. The good part is that they have a lot of competition at some key spots. You've got a very competitive offensive line group. You've got a bunch of different options at linebacker. Same is probably true at cornerback. It's certainly true at safety. The unusual part there is that it's the age of guys that are competing against each other, and the fact that even if a guy wins a job, it may not be his forever, and it may not even be the long-term plan regardless of who wins it, because we don't know a lot of how this roster is going to shake out yet in terms of what you need from this defense with Jeff Hafley coordinating at the NFL level for the first time, and what special teams is going to look like with new kickoff and, I guess, accordingly, kickoff return rules in play for this season. So I want to talk through, what I think are the five biggest position battles right now and see kind of level set for where we are heading into the sort of the dead period here. The offensive line, I think, and we'll probably spend the least time on this one, is where things are, I think, the strongest but also the most unsettled here. You've got two positions that I think are up in the air, left tackle and right guard. And I don't think it's clear what the outcome is going to be there right now for a couple of different reasons. First, Jordan Morgan is still getting his feet underneath him as an NFL player, to say nothing for of what the normal development timeline for a rookie offensive lineman. He's still real fresh at this in this. We're 6 weeks out. What from the NFL draft? Maybe less than 2 months for sure. He's still figuring things out, and it's not even clear where the Packers want him to play this season as he competes with Rasheed Walker, the incumbent at left tackle, though not a long-term incumbent there, not even a full-season starter at left tackle, and not even the full-time option when he was the starter for a lot of the season. So things are fairly unsettled there, and then you've got right guard factoring into that as well, because Jordan Morgan could be an option there too, depending on what Sean Ryan has to say about this whole situation. Now, Ryan is an interesting factor in this offensive line battle for a couple of different reasons. First, he's still a fairly high-level prospect, a third-year, third-round pick, should be a guy that's contending or at least comfortably in a starting role by this point. Yet we haven't seen all that much of him, and I'm really skeptical of anybody who says definitively what they think of Ryan one way or another at this point. Bill Huber of Packer Central or Sports Illustrated or whatever they call the company that he works for now wrote a pretty strong endorsement of Ryan earlier this week. And I don't really have any reason to doubt him. But, I mean, I don't think any of us have enough evidence to really say one way or another, yes, he is good or yes, he is bad. So he's a little bit, not even a little bit, he's still a pretty significant unknown last year. There were times when things went pretty well with Ryan down the stretch last year, and yet when the rubber met the road for the Packers last year, they turned primarily, though not exclusively, to John Runyan in the playoffs. Now Runyan is gone, of course, but there's a new contender around, and it's Jordan Morgan. How that all shakes out, I think, is very much up in the air. I do want to mention that I want to talk a little bit more about Andre Dillard here at some point. I just get the sense from what the Packers have said about him and what they've tried with him here in the early going, that there's a real shot that he makes this roster. How does that affect other guys in the roster? You know, Caleb Jones, Luke Tenuta, guys like that. I don't know, but I think we got to take another look at him in terms of how he shakes out on the roster. The next one that comes to mind is kicker. I think by this point next month, so July 13th, we're probably looking at a two-person kicker battle. I think it's going to be Greg Joseph and Anders Carlson. Jack Podlesny he's been a nice story. It's nice to have him around, but I think the Packers are going to try to narrow the competition as quickly as they can, and they probably want it to be Joseph and Carlson. To say nothing of the fact that the Packers are sticking around a USFL kicker. I forget his name. I think his last name is Bates, but one of the high performers in that league as well. They want to fix this kicker situation and get it fixed for real this time, instead of just going with their somewhat unusual plan last offseason in moving on from Mason Crosby, understandable, but then going with exactly one option to try to replace him and never really having any serious competition beyond that. I mean, you can like Anders Carlson all you want, and, you know, we've been pretty strong in the record on that we didn't think that was a good idea. But giving him no competition at all, wire to wire, and I know there was, Evan Parkey, somebody around for a little bit last year. It was never really a serious competition. This time, as they try to get into the post-Crosby era for real, they're leaving no stone unturned. And maybe it just wasn't as big a priority last offseason because of all the other stuff they had going on. Be that as it may, they probably should have done a little bit more. And they are going against that direction this year, going in a very different direction with Greg Joseph, Carlson, and Podlesny. But I think, we can't really say anything about the competition as it stands right now, other than I think they're going to narrow it pretty quickly, leaving it to Joseph and Carlson for most of training camp here. Now, safety is where things really get interesting in terms of battles, because the battle there is not, I think, going to be a pronounced one. I think you've got Xavier McKinney, the starter for sure. No one's going to take his playing time away. He could have the worst training camp that anybody has ever remembered, and he is going to be on the field just because you paid him half a bank worth of money, and he's going to have to be on the field. You're not going to bench him no matter what happens, and there's no reason to think that he would be bad or anything like that, but he's going to be on the field. Beyond that, though, it's kind of deceptively open. I think Javon Bullard is and should be the odds-on favorite to get most of the reps opposite McKinney. But, and this is a pretty substantial but here, we don't really know what the safety position looks like with Jeff Hafley, how he's going to deploy his safeties, what he really wants to do with them, how that safety rotation works, what kind of body types he wants out there, depending on what he's doing. His safety preferences were one of the things that he was most vocal about going back to our onboarding Jeff Hafley episodes back in whenever that was, January, February. But exactly how that works out when you've got to actually do the coaching stuff is still, I think, a pretty open question here. So how do the reps sort out beyond McKinney is the real question here. Bullard, again, probably the odds-on favorite. Evan Williams is going to have something to say about that, though, because he has some skills that Bullard doesn't have. I don't think he's nearly as good of a prospect as Bullard, but I think he does some things that Bullard doesn't do, and he's at least a different body type. Kitano Oladapo, I don't think is going to be a serious contender for major playing time on defense this year, but he certainly possesses attributes that no other safety on the roster has. And then, of course, you've got Anthony Johnson Jr., who got some sizable playing time down the stretch last year. Essentially, the Packers benched Rudy Ford in favor of him, and Ford was having a pretty solid season at the time, just kind of trying to figure out what their future was at safety as they looked to, all the free agent stuff that was going to happen in the offseason and ultimately did happen. So there are a lot of questions right now in terms of how that's going to work out, and we really do not have any answers as to what that's going to be, but it's a very open one. Cornerback is not so much a position battle, I think, as figuring out what you have. And that is going to be a big process for the Packers this season too, because they've got Jair Alexander, and he's going to hold down one of their top two corner spots for sure. You've got Keyshawn Nixon, who is going to be your slot option primarily, I would think, to start the season, though Javon Bullard can do a lot of slot things too. But then you've got Carrington Valentine, Corey Ballantyne, and Eric Stokes filling one of the other cornerback jobs. None of them are really slot options. They all play outside, and they're not going to take Jair Alexander's job. So who is going to get the main job across from Alexander right away this season? My money right now would be on Valentine, but we've seen enough good stuff from those other two guys that I don't think you can really rule them out. The good stuff from Eric Stokes is a couple years removed now, but he showed that he can do it, and if his injury stuff is behind him, a big if to be sure, he is the most tantalizing physical prospect of those three by a good ways. And, of course, Ballantyne played well at times last year, too. So how that sorts out, I think, is a very big and important question here, and there's three very clear options. And who knows, maybe something wild happens, and an undrafted guy comes out of nowhere again. Maybe Kalen King decides he wants to have a go at this battle, too. The book on him is that he played much better with a good cornerback across from him. Well, Jair Alexander is a pretty darn good cornerback. Can that bring out something in Kalen King? That remains to be seen. Those are the four big ones. There is a fifth one, though, that I'm kind of wondering about as we head into this season. Now, the Packers brought Preston Smith back for this season. I mean, he was under contract, but they decided to have him back for this season. But I don't think it's a controversial take to say that he is not the long-term option as their second edge rusher. Rashawn Gary is the unquestioned lead dog among the Packers' edges. But Preston Smith is not the long-term answer there. It's Lucas Van Ness. They want him as their next defensive end, rushing the passer with Rashawn Gary. So my question is less about a position battle here and more, when is the switch going to happen from Preston Smith being the number two guy to Lucas Van Ness being the number two guy, the de facto starter across from Rashawn Gary? Regardless of how many snaps they actually play, when is it going to happen that Van Ness takes over as the guy who's getting the bulk of the reps? Perhaps that has already happened. Maybe Preston Smith is going to be a rotational guy throughout the season. We don't know yet. But that switch is coming. When is it going to happen, if and just as likely when it does? The other thing that's been rolling around in my mind is kind of a random question here, and one where there is no answer definitively right now. But I was thinking about this in relation to our episode about Josh Jacobs and where he could stand in terms of acquisitions or Packers running backs and things like that. If he has the seasons that we think he's going to have as a member of the Packers, he'll be one of the most unusual backs in Packers history. Will almost certainly go down as the only back other than Amon Green in the Packers' top 25 all-time rushers who played for another team before the Packers. But I wonder if we might look back at Josh Jacobs as the best offensive free agent in Packers history, which sounds like a big claim until you sit and think for a second, who are the other big free agents in Packers history? And when I say free agents, I mean true unrestricted free agency. So we're looking at like 1992 to present, 1990 92, 93, 94, that era when unrestricted free agency became a thing, and you had guys like Reggie White hitting true free agency as they hit free agency. They had the option to literally sign anywhere that they wanted. So in that span, where does Josh Jacobs rank? Where could he end up ranking? I started thinking about this in part because of thinking about his legacy in that running back episode, but also thinking about the great free agents in Packers history. Reggie White, Charles Woodson, Julius Peppers, all defensive players. Where is the equivalent of those guys on offense? There really isn't one. You talk about free agent signings, you got to dig to guys like Desmond Howard and Jared Cook and Billy Turner, none of whom were the sort of big money contracts that Josh Jacobs got. So in terms of big impact free agents, Jacobs not only has a chance to be a historical oddity in Green Bay, but to potentially the best offensive free agent in team history. The knee-jerk names that came to mind outside of that list were guys like Keith Jackson, but he was a trade. Ron Wolf giving up a second-round pick to the Miami Dolphins for Keith Jackson. And Terry Glenn was a big-time acquisition, but he too was a trade. Mike Sherman giving up a draft pick to bring him over from the New England Patriots. So really there just haven't been that many big-time offensive acquisitions in Packers history. Jacobs has a chance to change that a little bit, and it's a historically unusual thing for the Packers to take a big swing in free agency. Even Jimmy Graham was not like some titanic free agent signing. It was a sizable contract to be sure, but I mean, other than the list that we talked about, you're looking at Martellus Bennett, who's really not changing a whole bunch of things for the Packers positively, and just continuing to make that look worse and worse as the years go by. But Jacobs really, if this works out, could be the first big free agent signing on offense in Packers history. Hey, not too shabby there. Another thing I was thinking about as the Packers wrap up minicamp is this idea of team life cycles. And this is something we talk about from time to time on the podcast. I think the best example of this is kind of the Packers' relationship to the Chicago Bears, basically over the past 7 years or so. In 2018, the Packers had come off a disappointing season. 2017, I think, was a disappointing year just about any way you slice it. Aaron Rodgers' collarbone injury really shaped that negatively in a lot of different ways. But coming off that season, the Packers were looking for basically a return to form. Let's get back to where we were early in 2017. We're still the lead dogs in the NFC North. Nobody has caught us yet or shown that they can catch us. But then you had the Chicago Bears, who were in the process of reshaping their whole roster too. They had a new head coach in Matt Nagy. They made the big offseason splash of trading for Khalil Mack right before the Packers opened the season against the Bears. And it looked like things were changing. It looked like the Bears might be making moves to catch the Packers, but they just weren't quite there yet. They needed to grow and gel a little bit together. And then they did catch the Packers that season. 2018, they got one over on the Packers later that year. And then 2019, Matt LaFleur comes in, and he has not lost to the Chicago Bears since. But just the Packers were a little bit ahead of where the Bears were in terms of their development. That changed later in that season. Then the Packers kind of retook the lead there, reshaping their own roster by doing a bunch of stuff on defense. Zadarius Smith, Preston Smith, Adrian Amos coming over there, Bailey Turner that next offseason and really shaping things around. So life cycles do matter. So where is this Packers team in its life cycle? Where are they in their development? Thinking back over when the Packers have really retooled things in relatively recent history, I think the answer I land on is that these are probably your 2010 Packers. I say 2010 instead of 2009 for a couple of different reasons. First, we saw enough out of Jordan Love last season that I don't think this is like a 2009 Packers situation where you're coming into the season wondering still a little bit what Aaron Rodgers is as a player. 2008 Rodgers' first season, a lot of good and a lot of bad, up and down season. He did get the contract extension from the Packers midway through the 2008 season, so that was settled coming into 2009. But you still didn't know, I think, what the ceiling was on Aaron Rodgers. By the end of 2009, you knew that the ceiling was pretty high. He had a really good season in 2009, had a great playoff debut in 2009 in the shootout with the Cardinals, though a bit of a miscue at the end on Rodgers' part played a part in that game ending. Now, I know the play that sticks in everybody's mind is the uncalled face mask on Rodgers' fumble that ended up, benefiting the Cardinals as they returned that for a touchdown. But the play prior to that, Aaron Rodgers missed an open Greg Jennings on a deep shot that would have ended the game the other way. I think there are some parallels there with Jordan Love ending the season on I think to that point in the season, or I guess at that point in the season, uncharacteristic bad decision, throwing late over the middle as he did, ending the Packers' comeback attempt against the 49ers and subsequently their season. But coming into 2010, you've got Rodgers showing what he can do, and all the pieces were in place for the Packers to go to a higher level than they were in 2009, getting ready to contend in 2010. There was also the factor of the defense essentially being in place heading into 2010. And this is where I think the comparisons are actually fairly strong for the Packers and the 2010 Green Bay Packers. For this year's team, you have a lot of pieces in place on defense, and there is a good chance that they make a jump this year that may be comparable to what the Packers had under Dom Capers in 2009. People, I think, forget how great some of those early defenses were under Dom Capers with essentially the same personnel that had been there already. Not a lot of turnover or additions on defense early in the Capers era, though B.J. Raji and Clay Matthews certainly noteworthy additions at the time. However, they still went from a not very good defense in 2008 to an elite level defense in 2009 and again in 2010 under Dom Capers. And if Jeff Hafley can come in and have even a moderately similar effect, there's no reason that the Packers can't contend here fairly early in the Hafley era and now in year, 6 of the Matt LaFleur era. So in terms of where the Packers are life cycle-wise, they are on the very early end of what should be a contending window here. They are ready to contend. They've got the pieces in place on offense and on defense. If Jeff Hafley can be a thing as a defensive coordinator, they are very much ready to contend. And this is a team that should be on the upswing and should be ready to hang with just about everybody on their schedule this year. There will be games this year where the Packers are not favored to win. That's just how it works. But I don't think there's going to be a single game this year where they're a big dog, looking at the gambling lines or anything like that. They shouldn't be ever more than like a standard 3.5 point road underdog. I would not expect to see that this year, barring some unforeseen developments with this team or significant injuries. They should be viewed as being right there with everybody on their schedule. And I think that's exactly where the Packers want to be. And if this team gels in its second season and the defense can be, competent, they'll be heading into the playoffs again this year as a team that other teams should be afraid to face because they've got so many weapons on offense. And if they've got a competent defense, that's a recipe for any game being winnable. And that, I think, is exactly where the Packers should have hoped to be. I think this is, looking at it from a general manager's perspective, heading into last season, I think some of the moves that they made showed that they didn't expect to contend in 2023, no matter what Brian Gutekunst said. Those are the things you have to say publicly, but I think no matter what the take was there from the front office, what the Packers did down the stretch was probably beyond their wildest dreams. Heading into 2024, coming off of that, you've got to feel, I think, almost unreasonably good about where you're at. You've got to feel like, we are ahead of schedule here. Looking at where the cap was a couple of years ago after the Aaron Rodgers departure, not even a couple of years ago, just over a year ago, 2025 looked like when things were really going to start loosening up. But with the Packers draft class from 2023 coming along so quickly, with Jordan Love finding his feet in the second half of the season, they're undoubtedly ahead of schedule. And so the window should be open starting right now. So that leads me to the final question here that I've been talking through in this late minicamp era. And this actually comes from a discussion we had in our Discord server. Become a patron or support us on Substack, patreon.com/thepowersweep and thepowersweep.substack.com. Become a paid supporter, either of those spots. You can access our Discord server. That's all the pitch I'll give you on this episode. But a question we were discussing in the Discord is this the year that we finally see the true Matt LaFleur offense? I've seen variations of this question floating around online this offseason. We've seen it every offseason, I think, since Matt LaFleur was hired. Is this the year that we finally see the Matt LaFleur offense as it's supposed to be run, the true Matt LaFleur offense? And to that end, I would say no. We are not going to see the true Matt LaFleur offense this year or next year or any year, because there's no such thing as the true Matt LaFleur offense. This is the football version of the no true Scotsman fallacy. If you're not familiar with that, look it up for a more eloquent explanation. But basically, it comes from kind of I don't know if it's even a historical example, but somebody saying like, well, a true Scotsman wears a kilt and plays the bagpipes and loves haggis. And somebody else comes along and says, no, that's not a true Scotsman. A true Scotsman does all those things, and I don't know, I've run out of Scottish stereotypes. But basically, it's a definitional question. You can keep adding conditions and things to really say that a true whatever is whatever you want it to be, when in reality there just may not be a definitive answer for that. The real answer to what the true Matt LaFleur offense is, or for that matter, the Kyle Shanahan offense or the Sean McVay offense or the Andy Reid offense or whatever, the true offense is what you put on the field, because that is your job as a coach, is to deal with what you've got and put the best version of that out on the field. If you ever hear a coach or somebody griping after they've lost a job or things didn't work out, saying, well, we would have done this if we had this, that, and the other thing, that's just a loser talking. That's a sore loser, and that just means that you are unwilling to confront your shortcomings as a coach. Everybody has those excuses. You got to get past those excuses and put your best offense on the field regardless of what you have, because if your offense is what's making things go, regardless of the players that you have, you are probably a better coach than has ever lived before. The real job of the coach is to put their players in the best position to succeed, regardless of what they would prefer to do. You've got to get the most out of the players that you have. So that kind of point aside, what is the Matt LaFleur offense really? Because I think there are still philosophical aspects to everybody's offense, regardless of what scheme tree you come from or what kind of coach you are. Put it this way, what are the pillars of the Matt LaFleur offense? Without going in too deep into any of these, except for one, the Matt LaFleur offense is based, I think, on positional diversity. You have a lot of different guys doing a lot of different things, lining up in different positions, receivers going inside and outside, running backs running out of a solo or a single back set, two back sets, motioning into the backfield from being split out wide, motioning out of the backfield from being split out, or from being, from lining up in the backfield, lining up as a receiver, tight ends who put their hand on the ground and act as an old school Y tight end, H-back tight ends that operate detached. He uses a lot of different formations and personnel groupings and positional diversity. I think that is a staple of Matt LaFleur's offense. You also see a lot of motion in Matt LaFleur's offense, not as many as some, but still quite a bit, a lot more than we saw under Mike McCarthy for sure. You also have a lot of zone running, less than we've seen in the past, but it's still primarily a zone run-based scheme. And then I want to go deepest on this one, but still I would say a run-designed offense, which is different than run-based. There really isn't such a thing as a run-based offense anymore, in that most teams are going to pass significantly more than they run. In neutral situations, and you can look at the stats for yourself at rbsdm.com, runningbacksdon'tmatter.com. Ben Baldwin of The Athletic and other outlets runs that site, does a lot of great stuff on EPA and play tracking and things like that through the tools on that site. But you can see run and pass frequency and what is characterized on the site as neutral situations. Basically, when the game is still in doubt one way or another, how often are teams running versus how much are they passing? In neutral situations, the Packers still pass significantly more than they run. More than half of their snaps are passes in neutral situations. They're in the bottom half of the league in 2023 in that rate, but still, they're passing more than they're running. They're almost exactly the same in 2023 as they were in 2022. They were, however, lower in 2022 and 2023 than they were in 21. They passed more in 21. They passed still more in 2020. And surprisingly, they passed still more back in 2019. So basically, they've been trending downward since Matt LaFleur arrived, but they are still primarily a passing offense. And I would guess they'll probably jump a little bit in 2023 for factors that we'll discuss here in a second. Anyway, that is all that to say, not run-based, run-designed in that every play is designed to look like a running play, or not every play, but many plays, most plays perhaps. So within those pillars, I think you see an offense that takes the form that best fits the personnel that they have. And that's really what coaching is. You're putting your guys in a position to succeed, to do what they do best in a way that serves the team overall. 2019 through 2021, why wouldn't you be more pass-heavy? Who did you have on the field at that point? You had Davante Adams out there. You had 4-time MVP quarterback Aaron Rodgers winning 2 of those 4 MVPs. Yeah, I would pass a lot too. The true version of my offense those years would look a lot like Matt LaFleur's, maybe even more pass-heavy. Why wouldn't you throw more if you've got Aaron Rodgers playing at an elite level and Davante Adams playing wide receiver as well as we've ever seen anybody play wide receiver? Of course you would. 2022 and 2023, of course you'd run a little bit more because you have less strength at wide receiver and quarterback uncertainty in both 2022 and 2023. That is the true Matt LaFleur offense. And you can see those trends at work even within the 2023 season. Weeks 1 through 9, the Packers in neutral situations passed less than half the time. They were under 50% in terms of their pass rate. But weeks 10 through 18, they were comfortably above 50%. So to return to where we started here, which of those offenses, weeks 1 through 8 or weeks 10 through 18, 9 through 18, weeks 1 through 9 and 10 through 18, you get it, whatever, which of those is the true Matt LaFleur offense? There is a correct answer, and it's the one that fits the capabilities of the players at the time, which is to say, both of those offenses are the true Matt LaFleur offense, because I think LaFleur is a good coach. I think he knows what he's doing. I think he knows how to get the most out of his players and, generally speaking, put them in a situation where they can succeed. And he did that last year, and building on that this year, I think we're going to see an even more true expression of his offense because he's going to have more opportunities to maximize the players that he has, and that is the truest expression of any coach's work, how much you're able to get the most out of the players that you do have. So there's a rambling all over the place episode for you, but that's how it is in the offseason. And I kind of like doing stuff like this from time to time, just a lot of stuff that's been on my mind and a lot of different things that we could talk about with the Packers. In any case, that's all I've got for you in this episode. I appreciate you tuning in. I would appreciate it even more if you'd take a second and share this episode with someone you think would enjoy it. It's going to help more people find the show and get more people involved in this conversation that you and I are having about the Green Bay Packers, which in turn is going to help all of us, me included, become smarter Packers fans. And as I always say, smarter Packers fans are better Packers fans, and better Packers fans are what we all want to be. I'm your host, John Meerdink. We'll see you next time on Blue 58.